was first asked by Wendy to come here, I thought, what a great opportunity. You know, we can kind of just rear back and throw fastballs on theology of work. And we can get everybody to think about a theology of work. And then I thought, you know, that's important. 60% of your waking hours are spent in some sort of job, career, or whatever. Maybe more. And all people, all Christians, whether Lutheran, Calvinist, Arminian, Yoderian, Catholic, whatever, you're going to have some form of a theology of work. And then I thought, you know, that's not what my career has said to me. And I thought I'd just take a little side trip at first and remind us exactly about an Old Testament condition called leprosy. You say, why leprosy? Does this thing work? I think it does. Yeah. Leprosy, as you know, is an Old Testament grab bag of skin diseases, some of which would have been what we now consider leprosy. Most probably were not. But it was the term used. And as such, leprosy was considered highly infectious. And the sufferers were compelled to be separated, quarantined. If you recall in Mosaic law, they had to go and be pronounced clean by the priest. And he had to follow a certain pattern of criteria. And of course, some of these people would be cured, but numbers wouldn't over time, and they were chronically isolated. And those are the ones that are probably really leprosy. The others who either died or got better had something else. And the thing about leprosy is that it does come associated with a level of fear. People in those days were afraid of it because they thought it's highly infectious. That's not the case. But it also comes with an identifiable group of physical disabilities and changes. So you see people with facial changes, palsies. Because of the way leprosy works, it picks on superficial nerves because it's temperature dependent on where it grows. So nerves over your hand, over the zygoma, over the jaw, paralyzing parts of your face, median nerve, ulnar nerve, paralyzing parts of your hand, leaving you with sensory problems. And the legs could also be affected, and there would be no way to hide your situation because it would be apparent to everybody. So you can see that even in this, once you're identified, and it's the natural tendency would be for you to be socially isolated. And they might consider themselves, and others may have considered them, to be sick because of sin, adding insult to injury. So here we are, and you see that in Job, for instance. I mean, what a clear example. It wasn't leprosy, but he had a skin condition. So his skin was basically rotting off, and he was in terrible condition, yet his friends repeatedly tried to get him to see that it had to be something he had done wrong. It's sort of like prosperity gospel theology today, okay? And also, you see, this persists over the years, right down to our time. But Jesus, when he saw this blind man, he said, the disciples said, well, who sinned, this man or his parents? And Jesus said, I'm not going to get pushed into that false dichotomy. He said, neither, because that's not what it's about. So now we know that leprosy in modern terms is not very contagious, and there was no need for them to be isolated, but there was no way to tell them from the others. So isolation leads to a grouping together, and that's why you see in that account in 2 Kings about Ben-Hadad laying siege to Samaria, and then he flees, imagining that armies have been recruited to fight against him, abandons everything, all the food and weapons and everything, and the whole army retreats, and nobody knew except 4 lepers who were isolated outside the city. The closest they could get to safety was in the hollow of the gate, but the gates were against them. So they thought, well, look, we got nothing to lose. Why don't we go down and offer ourselves to the Syrians, and we'll get ourselves, either they're going to kill us, which we're going to die anyway, or maybe they'll have mercy. Go there, and lo and behold, there's no one there. So, of course, they immediately hightailed it back and told all their people in the city, no. The first thing they did was grab a lot for themselves, make sure that was secure, look after your RSP, and you never know when you're going to get accepted back into society. And then once you've taken your share, you can let them know, and lo and behold, in the stampede to get the goodies, the king was killed in the gate. So there are other examples of that. A band of lepers, you might recall the 10 leprous men who between Samaria and Galilee came to Jesus asking for mercy, and he said, go and show yourself to the priest. I'm sure they thought, well, we're not in a condition to go to the priest, but off they go. Sort of like Naaman the leper said, I don't want to have a dip in that river. I got better rivers back home. I'm sure they thought, there's no point to this, but let's do it anyways. Nothing else worked. So on their way, they discover, as they journey, they're healed. And one came back and said thanks. So Jesus gives us that story to show the priority of recognizing what God's done in our lives and giving thanks for it, but also to show how ungrateful we tend to be and how easily we forget what God's done for us. Head and neck cancers, just before I leave leprosy, this is a lady with advanced type leprosy. You can see that she has lost the bridge to her nose. She has lost her fingers. Her face is probably paralyzed. This one here shows a problem with median nerve and ulnar nerve. So her hand is insensate. It keeps getting injured, gets infected, and the tips gradually fall off. Some of these people were hired by the local village to pull things out of the fire. And this lady on her legs, on her feet rather, has a similar thing, and she needs to wear these special protective shoes just to keep from getting further injuries. Well, head and neck is a group of diseases. It may affect your appearance. It may affect articulation. It may affect your voice. It may affect eating. It may affect breathing. So these areas that you are quick to recognize are those most closely associated how others view us, how we function, and how we may even view ourselves. And there aren't many groups of illnesses that are like that. Maybe some of the arthritises are a bit like that. But this is the closest group of diseases to leprosy that I found because of the isolation and the deformities and disabilities altogether. Traditionally, it was thought that the group of diseases I'm talking about are upper aerodigestive tract, so mouth, throat, voice box, sinuses, nose, facial skin, scalp, and then on a different basis, the salivary glands, the thyroid, and then lumps in the neck. We're not talking eye disease, we're not talking brain cancer or anything like that. Most of the diseases of the aerodigestive tract traditionally have been thought to be caused by exposure to smoking and or drinking. As you can picture, it's hard to sort that out because you won't find many drinkers who aren't smokers, but you may find a number of smokers who aren't drinkers. So you can sort out the smoking side better than the other way, so that requires some sophisticated stats to figure this out. Anyway, in recent times, we noticed, for instance, that lung cancer was declining, and all the smoking-related ones, esophagus, were declining, bladder even, was declining. But head and neck was level. So why was that? Well, some bright woman in a lab at Johns Hopkins looked at that in detail and discovered that all of the leveling of the curve in head and neck was due to one subsite. Everything else was declining, but one subsite was tremendously increasing, and that was tonsil and base of tongue. So she looked into that and discovered that that one, rather than being smoking and or alcohol related, was due to human papillomavirus. So now you can see that we have a setup for social stigmatization, because people are stigmatized for over drinking, for smoking, except for vaping, I guess, and you got a sexually transmitted disease. Okay, so just as leprosy reveals its presence by disability, so does head and neck cancer. And we have cancers of the skin that gives lumps. I'll show you one of those. Of the mouth, that gives tongue cancers. And these diseases are feared for the people that know enough about them because of the associated social problems, functioning problems, identification and self-identity problems. They are a group of diseases, though, that you can identify somebody who has it. You can identify it by, for instance, when they eat, they dribble all the time. Okay, they haven't had a stroke, but they have an insensate part of their lip as a result of the reconstruction. Or they can't pronounce their words properly, or they can't mobilize the food between the front and get it to the back to swallow. So they go on to more liquid food. So now they can't go out to the restaurant and have a good time with their friends. Or they've got a problem with their speech. Their voice isn't working. It's more like that. And gradually gets more and more difficult. So you can see that this is a group of diseases that nobody wants to get. Just as the leprosy group will get depressed and so on, so can you imagine will some of these people with mouth cancers and voice box cancers. They often are socially isolated. In fact, we did a little research study among our patients. We took 20 patients who had been at least 2 years after their voice box had been removed and didn't have recurrence. And they're doing all their breathing through a hole here. Coughing, sneezing, everything comes out here. Nothing comes out their nose and mouth when they breathe. Their voice box is gone. So the sound source of how you make voice is gone, needs to be replaced with something else. We have 2 or 3 ways of doing that. And we asked these people, we tried to figure out, well, what's their real concern at this stage? And we had 3 groups of people giving answers. We had us as treaters of the disease, we had the patients themselves, and then we had naive listeners who neither treated the disease nor had the disease, nor knew anyone who had the disease. And it's interesting because the naive group thought that the main problem that would bother them would be communication. The treatment team thought that the main problem would be their fear of recurrence. But the patients found their biggest problem was the social isolation that was occasioned because they would be talking to somebody, even they could get a useful voice and carry on a conversation, but then suddenly they would cough and out would come a puff of air or some saliva, and they'd be afraid they're going to offend whoever they're talking to. And you can imagine in intimate relations, this might be a problem as well. I've had several patients who've overcome this in remarkable fashion. One man with no voice box became the leading salesman of Mohawk Ford for 10 years running, until he retired, actually. He was the top salesperson in the company. I've got another one right now who's selling used cars. I'm not sure if that's quite the same. I've had others, though, who've got to work in dusty environments, like run giant earth-moving machines or put in drywall, where there's dust everywhere, which we usually advise them not to do, but this is their life, this is their job, so they wanted to do it. So I've had a chance to see some people who have an amazing capacity to overcome the ostracization and the self-imposed isolation. Well, I sort of jumped ahead a bit. I'll give you a few examples of this in a minute. But why study medicine? Now, medicine, as you know, if you're a doctor or nurse, gets a sort of a free pass among Christians because Jesus showed compassion. He healed lots of people, and he said that I always do the works that the Father tells me to do. So, it's an airtight case, right? So if you're a dualistic type of Christian and you think of careers and so on in layers, at the top you have the full-time Christian worker of missionaries, seminary professors, pastors, evangelists, teachers, and so on. And not far below, though, you've got doctors, nurses, and of course mothers. And then you have everybody else down further. Well, my family of origin never bought into this dualistic model at all. My mom became the medical officer of health of North York. My dad was a leading meteorologist in Canada. One sister became a doctor. My wife was a doctor. Her mother was a doctor. Seemed to me doctors were all women. One of my brothers broke the mold and became a farmer. But all these medical people were involved in the Christian Medical Society and the Evangelical Medical Missions Aid Society, in some cases right from its inception. And medical missionaries, it's a good clue to you guys who later are going to have a family. Medical missionaries were welcome guests after they spoke at the church at our table for lunch. And I remember Stanley Brown, who was probably like Order of the British Empire type doctor for leprosy, who incidentally later died of larynx cancer, although he never smoked in his life. They were visitors in our home, so it gave me a chance to talk to some of these people right up front. I also happen to be blessed with good fine muscle coordination. I love making little models and that sort of stuff. So genetics and family played a big role in my choice to enter medicine. Medicine today, though, is a proud place. One often hears or detects the idea that we're mostly self-made. We got there by the strength of our effort, intelligence, whatever. Okay, so let's look at that. Did you choose where you were born? Did you choose who your parents would be? Did you choose when you were born? So in what sense are you self-made? Did you choose your abilities? Did you choose your early friends? Did you choose where your parents sent you to school? So that that deterministic argument just falls flat. I mean, it just doesn't work. There is choice. But God, interestingly, and in salvation, there's choice too. We just don't know quite how to apportion the responsibilities. We're discussing that all the time. It keeps people employed. But essentially, God didn't make even that a slam dunk, because then there wouldn't be any moral choice to make. It would be there's no alternative. So that's why you should welcome the fact that there's room for discussion, because it should tell you we have moral choice, and we can persuade people on that basis with the help of the Spirit. So why go into surgery? I mean, there's better things to do. I remember thinking of going on pediatric oncology ward at Sick Children's, and you'd see these little kids with their IVs and chemo in their arm, running up and down, riding their IV poles, and like it's a skateboard, and it just looked like they're having a great time, and you stop to think, most of these kiddies are going to be dead soon. And there's going to be a lot of sadness. And I thought, despite my capabilities to compartmentalize emotionally and keep things separate, I better not go into that field because I wouldn't be able to handle that. So, like most people, where you go in a career has a lot to do with people you meet along the way. Someone will come along and you'll say, gee, that's somebody I really like to emulate. He's got a great attitude. She's just got all the enthusiasm and all the skills to make this work, and that looks like something I'd be very interested in. And that happened to me too, You get to see that, and so finally ended up in surgery and then in head and neck surgery. Well, here's a patient who has tongue cancer. Now, what I've drawn on him is a little patch that we're going to use to make a new tongue. And at the same time, we're going to open his neck with this incision, take out the lymph nodes here, and we're going to go in his mouth, take out his left tongue, and then we're going to leave this patch of tissue hooked on its blood vessels, tunnel it under his jaw, and make a new tongue for him. There's his cancer. Looks pretty ugly, as you can see. Right there on the left side. This is actually the tip of his tongue, so you can see there's a bit of the left side not involved. And there's another view of it. Okay, that's not a bad one. That's moderately bad. And there it is taken out with a margin of normal tissue around it. Sorry if you've had lunch. And here is the reconstruction with that patch of skin inside, restored the contour of his tongue. The motion of his tongue is a bit reduced because the nerve to this side is gone, but we were able to save the sensory nerve, so he has feeling there. And he can eat everything. He talks almost normally, and he doesn't even grow hair on this patch of skin because we had to give him post-operative radiation therapy, and it killed all the hair follicles. So sometimes there's silver linings. And this is a girl from Cameroon. She's 16. And she has a skin cancer. And she's put all kinds of traditional medications on it for several months. It's gotten larger and larger. I've taken it out, put in that same flap I showed you before. And there it is with the sutures out, face working fine. The trouble with Cameroonian patients is I only get out there once a year or maybe twice, and so that I have no way of following them up, This is a man who stepped off the plane from Poland, and he had this thing growing here, inadequately excised by another surgeon and recurred within a few months. And it's obviously that it just didn't have the right procedure done, so we fixed that up. And I was going to use another type of, he couldn't pay, so we had to do it as economically as possible. Well, there's a little flap here you can use, but see, he's got a tattoo here, so I drew it on first, like I would miss the tattoo, but I actually had to extend it through the tattoo and then make the remains match. So anyway, put it up there. And there it is, sort of hanging on its little pedicle of blood vessels. And it gets swung in, so it's sitting in there, and there's a little bit of it, the tattoo. I told him, come on back, we'll take that off when it's all healed up. And he never showed up. Because that would be, he didn't matter to him, really. So, well, in all of this, what have I found important? I think the first thing I found is important to listen and to show respect. I remember once I was in the operating room, and my assistant was a resident who I didn't know too well, but he's a Muslim guy, and apparently very devout. And he said to me, we were doing a big case, and it was about 3 p.m. He said, I'm feeling a little bit weak. I said, well, scrub out and go get something to eat. Oh, I can't eat right now. I said, why is that? He said, well, and I knew zippo about Islam, right? I didn't know if it should say Muslim or Muslim, you know what I mean, that level. So, and I said, well, just scrub out, we can manage. You know, you get yourself some sugar and you'll perk right up. Can't do it. I said, why not? Because I'm fasting. I said, what are you fasting for? He said, because the prophet said you got to fast. I said, now, Sam, that may be what the prophet said. But you got to remember this. The prophet never did head and neck surgery. And you got to also remember that you wouldn't get to first base on any thought system, any worldview, if you couldn't look after people who were looking after other sick people and make some sort of exception. Oh, he said, oh, that doesn't happen. I said, well, you just go check with your boss, your imam, and see what he says. And he went and checked, and sure, it came back the next day. Yeah, he said, I don't need to do that. I can eat, but I have to make it up later. And I thought, thank the Lord for grace. Anyway, but anyway, he and I got along quite well, and we had talks about faith and so on. The other thing that's very important in a field like any field, I think, is to be an expert at what you do. Have excellence of it. Be capable. Be confident. Not overconfident, but suitably confident, and be truthful. Go the extra mile. I've had lots of opportunities to do something extra for the patients, and they can't understand why a doctor would do that, because you don't get paid for that kind of thing. But that's what you do if you're a follower of Jesus. Give all the credit to God who enables and gifts us, and speak on his behalf when you can. You can't lecture your patients. That would be very inappropriate. Be humble, use humor, and walk with the Lord Jesus day by day. So, in order to maintain a living relationship with the Lord, I know it's hard on you when it's sort of an extension of being a student, whether you're a parent, but you're tired. Get up early and get the time with the Lord, because that's really important. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself slipping. When it comes to bearing witness, I've had to learn that in medicine there's a power imbalance. There's therapists and there's patients. So you've got to respect that, and you can't take advantage of that. You can't talk to patients directly quite often. In fact, there's even legal restraints and constraints on you about that in Ontario. But that doesn't mean that nothing happens. I had to keep a patient waiting once. Well, I've done that quite often, actually, but unfortunately. But he was waiting, and while he was there, he was looking at this cutaway view of the inner and middle ear. I don't do much surgery, but the middle and on the ear, but the middle and inner ear are really good, intricate, anatomically sophisticated things to put on the wall, because they can't solve that in half an hour. And he'd been looking at it, and I came in, and he said, you know, Doc, and he's the guy that saved his life, actually. Not saying that, that's just the truth. I'm not bragging or anything. And he said, you know, Doc, I've been looking there. I said, well, sorry to keep you waiting, you know. He said, no. I've been looking there, and the thing that amazes me is, how can that arise from an amoeboid-like creature who crawled out of the slime and ooze several billion years ago and developed into that? I'm having trouble with that. I said, well, good, because I don't believe that's how it happened. Oh, he said, well, I said, you know, God made things. He said, yeah, I'm the director for the local Rotary, and I give the lecture on the comparative religions every year. I said, well, God not only made everything, but he loves what he made. And he may have used some evolutionary processes in parts of it, but he's still responsible. He did the whole work, everything. So he said, well, here's a question I've had. How can God, who's so high expect to relate to me, a human. Well, that's a gift wrap package of a question for you. I said, you know, God anticipated that would be the trouble. And for that reason, he gave us Jesus. And we talked then about the gospel. He didn't become a believer, but he wanted a book. So I took him C.S. Lewis's book, Mere Christianity. And I had to drive to his house, a town 60 kilometers away. And showed up with it. And he said, "Wow, Doc, it's really impressive. You came out and gave me this book." I said, "Yeah, take a look at it. Tell me what you think." So I saw him the next visit. He said, "That was a fantastic book. I liked it so much, I gave it to my daughter. And she liked it so much, she made their book club read it. And that became the book they studied for a month." So you see, things do happen. People understand, you know, that none of us has the full answers. But they are interested, if you care, that you share Jesus. They're interested. I'm just called to follow Jesus like you are. None of us is more, in our calling of any of us is more significant than another, or more sacred. There's no first-class Christians. There's no part-time Christians. They're all full-time. They're all first-class. There are no casuals. So do this holy calling with all your heart. Excuse me. And God will enable you. Count on it as you trust him. So here's a few pearls for those, for myself, having come out of the healing professions, and for you to consider. When considering human suffering, remember to bookend it appropriately. First, the way things are now is not how they were designed to be. And second, the way things are now is not how they will ultimately be. It's in the problematic here and now that we have questions. And the cross of Christ is where God suffered for us. And I believe it also gives us a big clue as to how important suffering of us is to God. We don't know all the answers. Don't pretend we do, or even expect to, this side of eternity. Learn to love your colleagues and enjoy them. You won't agree with them all the time, but they are God's gift to you and for you to share him with. Remember that you are only responsible for this generation, not another, unless you write lots of books, and only for those people who God brings across your path, not for all those he doesn't. Live for eternity, you've heard that before, but also for the present. Enjoy your work and be 100% present in your work, for God gave it to you. Daily walk with God and learn to look at him rather than your problems first thing in the day. So those are some of the, in summary, some of the things that I've thought and seen and experienced in this career. Very unusual little niche of surgery. None of you will ever go into it. There's about 1 per million for people doing this. But that's what God called me to do. So I just put it out to him, as I hope you do in whatever he calls you to do.